Hello there to all my cousins and other relatives that are on this site. I'm Gerald Coleman. I'm the son of Imogene Vaughn Coleman. She was the oldest living daughter of Lee and Pearl Vaughn. And before she died, she lived with me for 5 years here in Abilene, Texas. And before she died, she made a bunch of audio recordings on a little handheld recorder and told a lot of stories and history, and I wanted to try to get a couple of them on here so y'all could hear it. And anyway, Steve Brown was smart enough with computers and stuff. After she passed away in 2005, he digitized her recordings and put them on a CD, and I'm trying to figure out how to get them onto the computer here and add some pictures and set it in motion somewhat. I did one yesterday and it turned out okay, I guess, but I'm going to try another one and put her instead of music. I'll put a few pictures of her with some of her family.
Yeah, Larry, I'm going to try to tape a little more. Anyway, I was telling you stories about my great-grandfather, John Vaughn, and I think when I laid the tape up now, tell you about his wife, what I know about her. My Aunt Martha, great-aunt Martha, was her youngest daughter, and she told me some of these things, but I remember myself, my great-grandma Vaughn, she died in 1918, and I remember her. They lived right across the hill from where my grandmother, George Vaughn, lived, and I stayed with her the biggest part of my life when I was growing up. Anyway, we'd walk across the hill to Grandpa and Grandma's house. Well, anyway, Grandma always tried to make me feel important, and I remember her as a very gracious lady with seemed like she was tall and graceful. She was never humped or anything like some of the old people in them days. And I remember she had this beautiful snow white hair, and it was wavy, and I thought she was beautiful. But anyway, she would always make me feel important. She had a churn of milk always sitting close to the fireplace, and that's the way I'll explain a little bit how we got our butter in them days, in case you don't know. But anyway, she had a tall crockery churns. They were probably a couple of feet high. Anyway, they held about, I guess, maybe up to 2 or 3 gallons of milk. But anyway, they pour their milk in there and keep it so warm, well, it would, what they call turn, it would kind of sour. In other words, it didn't smell like it does today when the milk spoils. Now it stinks, but it didn't stink then. It just had kind of a sour smell. So when the milk got just right, why, you had to churn it. And the churn had was like a broom handle, and on the end of it was a little dasher thing that was made out of a couple of crossed pieces of wood. And there was a hole in the lid that you put on the churn, and this handle went through that hole. And so you sat and pushed it up and down in that milk, and it churned it, and it made butter. And every now and then you'd look on the churn stick that had the thing that you're churning with. You'd look on there and see, and when it got to making little tiny flakes of butter on there, well, you'd churn real easy then for 2 or 3 times, and the butter would kind of gather together, and then you could take the butter off the top. So that's when they'd empty it, take the butter off the top, put the buttermilk in one container, and they'd take the butter then, put it in a bowl or something, and put some clear water in it to wash the milk out of it. You'd kind of work it around with your hands and get the milk out of it, and then you had a butter mold usually that you'd pack it in there, and it'd make it square, or sometimes just put it in a bowl. It didn't make any difference, but that's how you got the butter. Anyway, Grandma would let me churn for her, and she knew I could do that, and it made me feel really important that I could churn for Grandma. So she was a gracious old lady, and she died, and I remember going to her funeral, and their youngest son was mentally retarded, and he was called Andrew, and he, at the time I stayed with my grandmother, why, he was living with them, because my grandpa had arthritis in his knees, and Grandma had been kind of ruffled up. A car had hit her on the road up there, and some way she didn't get off the road good enough or something, anyway, and bunged her up pretty bad, so they were both kind of laid up. So Grandpa let Andrew come over there, and hadn't been for Andrew, they'd had a hard time getting by. So Andrew lived with them up until the tornado killed both of them and him. So that was John and Rhoda's baby. That was the last child they had, anyway. They had, let's see, altogether they had about 5 or 6 children anyway. And that's about Rhoda, and her real name was Rhodera, but everybody called her Rhoda. And Rhoda's on her stone up there in the Glendale Cemetery, and because she's buried up there. But anyway, that's all that, except I do remember one tale about Rhoda's family. Her father, I don't know how many of Rhoda's family was, but they were raised on a colony in Alabama on a river there, and I don't know how her and my great-grandfather got together. I wish now I had got him to tell me how, but I don't know how they ever met. But anyway, her father had 3 boys, and this was, I guess, after they moved to Arkansas or something. But anyway, he had 3 grown boys, and he wasn't going to let them go to the army, and so they just never did go, and they were supposed to go, or at least go and sign up to go. And so one dark night, Army officer come to the house and said, you have to send these boys have to register. And he said, no. He said, my boys are not going to fight in this war. It's not our war, and we're not going to fight. And Army officer told him, said, well, you'll either fight or you and all 3 of your sons will go to prison. Said, it's just up to you, but we're taking your sons tonight. And so he decided then, I guess, to let his boys go to the war. But anyway, that was, I guess, the Civil War. Anyway, a long time ago. But anyway, he had to let the boys go to the war. And so I never found out where and how they got together, but she was born. She was a French woman, and that side, her folks was French. Her father's name, I don't know now if he was French or not, but her father's name was Kendricks. Kendrix. Kendricks, I think's the way you spell it. But anyway, that was Rodera's father. And anyway, I'll go on now and down and tell you some things about my grandfather. Was one of John Vaughn's sons, and then he had another son that was named John, and John disappeared when he was a pretty young man and left home, I guess, to work or something, and they never did hear from him anymore. He's kind of a strange character, and it rocked on for years, and they thought maybe he'd been killed or something had happened to him. So he finally showed up again, but he'd been living with the Mennonite people, they called them Mennonites. It was kind of a religious, I wouldn't say cult, denomination that lived kind of up north somewhere, but he went up there and got with them and I guess joined their religion or something, but he made a preacher. Anyway, he preached till he died. He moved later somewhere out in California. He had a little church. But that was John and Rhoda's son. And then my grandfather, George, and then he had 3 sisters and 1 brother, I guess. Anyway, George Vaughn was my father's father. And they're the ones I lived with a lot because they lived close to school, country school, that I could walk. And my parents moved around a lot and sometimes lived too far from school that I couldn't walk and get to school. So that's one of the reasons I lived with Grandma. But I was all torn up because I lived with 2 different places and 2 different bunches raised with 2 different bunch of children. And when I was at Grandma's, I was lonesome and homesick to see the others, and when I was with them, it was vice versa. So anyway, I lived with them because they lived close to school. But my